You step off the beaten path and immediately, the air feels wrong. Not in a ghosts are here way, though you might start wondering about that later, but in a heavy, quiet way, like the land itself remembers something you will never truly understand. The grass is tall and whispering, brushing against your legs with a soft hiss that makes you flinch, like it knows too much. There are no signs, no guideposts, no cheerful welcome to Cahokia banners. Just the mounded silhouettes on the horizon, looming like ancient skyscrapers built by hands long gone. Forget what your high school textbooks told you. This wasn't some sleepy village with a few scattered huts. Cahokia was ambitious, gigantic, almost obscene in its scale. Mounds stacked atop mounds, perfectly arranged, forming a city so large it could make even modern planners blush. You can't help but feel small, microscopic. And the weirdest part? It's silent. No cars, no chatter, no Wi-Fi. Just the wind, and it only gets worse once you step closer. Before we wander any deeper, let's slow down. You might want to grab a cup of tea, dim the lights, curl up somewhere soft. Like really soft. Because the story of Cahokia isn't exciting in the flashy, dramatic way you're used to. It's slow. It's creeping. And sometimes, it's horrifying in the quietest way possible. While you settle in, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you're feeling ambitious, and comment where you're watching from. Yes, even if it's your kitchen in your pajamas. Now, let's talk about the first thing you notice when you arrive. The smell. You'd expect soil, maybe the sweet scent of wildflowers. Instead, it's earth, but heavy. Like it's been sitting, undisturbed, for hundreds of years, digesting centuries of secrets. If air could carry gossip, this place would be loud. Your nose wrinkles, and you take a cautious step forward, remembering that there is no guidebook for how to navigate a city abandoned for nearly a millennium. You pause at the base of Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in Cahokia. It's massive. You've seen pictures, of course, but the photos lie. They always do. They flatten, minimize, betray the scale of what's right in front of you. You can almost hear the faint thud of 1,000 feet climbing these terraces long ago, but of course, that's just your imagination. Probably. The ground beneath your boots is uneven, a mixture of packed earth and tiny, forgotten pebbles that crunch with every step. And the silence, oh, the silence. It's punctuated only by the occasional caw of a distant crow, which seems to be judging your presence. Really? You think you belong here? It asks, though you know crows are terrible conversationalists. And then you notice the woodhenge, or what's left of it. A circle of enormous posts, half buried and rotting, arranged with mathematical precision that would embarrass any modern surveyor. You can almost picture the people here, standing in a circle, maybe performing rituals, counting the sun's path, marking solstices. Or maybe they were just trying to figure out when to plant their corn. Either way, the sense of purpose, or obsession, is palpable. You brush your hand across the dry grass, and it's rougher than expected. The kind of rough that leaves your skin tingling with an odd mix of awe and unease. It's impossible to ignore the feeling that every step you take is retracing a path laid out by hands that no longer exist. And yet, the city feels alive. Not in the way a city hums with traffic or chatter, but in the way a ghost lingers in a room long after everyone leaves. Patient, observing, waiting. Congrats, you're officially at Cahokia. Welcome to a city that once thrived, where mysteries layer atop each other like the very earth beneath your feet. By the end of this walk, you'll see bones, remnants, and artifacts that will make you question what you thought you knew about the past. Spoiler alert, it's not good. And honestly, that's the fun of it. You step off the base of Monk's Mound, and immediately your feet sink slightly into the soft, packed earth. The mound isn't just big. It's oppressive, like the land itself is leaning down to watch you, judging your audacity for daring to tread where so many have vanished. You take a breath. Damp, earthy, faintly sweet. Probably centuries of decayed leaves and whatever else got tossed in here over a millennium, fills your nose. You try to ignore it. You fail. The city stretches out in every direction, a patchwork of mounds, flat plazas, and long abandoned paths. You realize that Cahokia wasn't designed for wandering aimlessly. No, it was built to impress. big, overwhelming, make you feel small in the cosmic scheme of things big. And somehow, that's still true even now, centuries later, as the wind whispers through the tall grass like a disappointed old librarian shushing you. You notice the smaller mounds first. They're not glamorous, just low humps of earth, but you know they hide secrets. Burial sites. Ritual deposits. Maybe even a long-forgotten message from someone who thought leaving something behind would grant them immortality. You stoop, brushing a finger over the edge, half expecting a ghost hand to meet yours. Unsurprisingly, nothing. And yet, something watches. Probably a crow. Ahead, a plaza opens up, flat and wide, the size of a modern football field. Can you imagine the people who once gathered here? Thousands of them, maybe, all shouting, trading, laughing, arguing, plotting. Now it's quiet. So quiet that every crunch of your boots sounds like a drumbeat announcing your intrusion into history. No vendors, no children running through the dust, no sense of roasting corn. Just thick with memory. You wander toward a cluster of post holes, ghostly reminders of structures that once held roofs and walls. People lived here. People dreamed, fought, and died here. And now it's just holes in the earth. No tile roofs. No modern plumbing. No sense of dignity. You pause to consider how tiny your own apartment feels in comparison. And forget your AC, you're lucky if a wooden hut doesn't collapse on you in a storm. The wind picks up, brushing through the grass, carrying something odd. Faint smoke? Or maybe it's just the imagination, because of course it is. You step closer to a mound with scattered fragments of pottery and stone tools at its base. Each piece is a message, a whisper from someone who existed and then didn't. You pick up a shard. Smooth, heavy one. Maybe a fragment of a plate someone once used to eat their dinner, long before takeout containers and microwaves made life simple. The thought makes you smirk darkly. Convenience isn't everything. Some things are better left unknown. You stumble upon a faint depression in the earth. Probably a pit, or a cellar, or a grave. No sign says, "Hey, stay out of this." Archaeologists might have marked it centuries later, but to you, it's just a hole. And holes, as you quickly learn, have opinions about intruders. You glance around. Nothing. Just the slow sway of grass, the occasional crow, and the ghostly whisper of the wind. You tell yourself it's fine. Definitely fine. As you wander deeper into the city, the layout becomes increasingly deliberate. Streets, plazas, mounds aligned with precision. Not chaos. Planning. Order. Someone here cared, obsessively, about how everything fit together. And yet, there's irony in it. Meticulous planning, and yet the city vanished. Abruptly. You wander deeper into Cahokia, and suddenly the city shifts from open plazas to tight clusters of smaller mounds. At first glance, they look innocent, mere bumps in the earth, forgotten by anyone who isn't paying attention. But you know better. You can feel it, a subtle heaviness underfoot, like the soil itself is burdened by secrets. You stop, glance around. No one else is here, of course. Only the wind, and the faint sense that the city is breathing through the dirt. Some mounds are unremarkable. Low, rounded, almost playful in their shapes. You run a hand over one, noting how the grass barely conceals what lies beneath. Burial mounds. Of course. You should have guessed. Nothing says, "Welcome to Cahokia," like a subtle reminder that people were not meant to last forever. You step back, trying to imagine who might have been buried here. A chief? A warrior? Or just someone unlucky enough to die at the wrong time? Doesn't matter. The earth doesn't discriminate. Your eyes catch something strange, a faint outline in the dirt, almost invisible unless you know it's there. A mound within a mound, smaller, darker, deliberately placed. Intrigue. Mystery. Slightly ominous vibes. You crouch closer, brushing your fingers over the edge. There's no plaque, no sign, no comforting modern explanation. Just soil, and the sense that someone once deliberately layered it this way. To protect? To honor? Or maybe to hide something no one once found. You shiver slightly. Yes, it's just dirt. But it's heavy dirt. Very intentional dirt. You continue walking and the mounds grow denser, more numerous. Every few steps, you stumble across fragments of the past poking through the grass, bits of pottery, stone tools, tiny shells, and occasionally something you can't immediately identify. It's the randomness that unnerves you. People lived, worked, and died here, leaving these shards behind as clues to a civilization that vanished. And here you are, picking through their leftovers, like a kid rifling through a closet labeled, "Do not touch." Some mounds are clearly ceremonial. Slightly raised, carefully shaped, oriented with precision. The sun hits them at odd angles, casting long shadows that stretch across the grass like the arms of something watching. You notice small trenches and depressions, possibly excavations from centuries ago, carefully done by archaeologists who wanted to know more, but who, like everyone before them, had to leave before the city revealed its full story. And now you understand. The further you go, the less the earth wants to cooperate. You pause at one particularly ominous mound, the kind that makes you slow your breathing without realizing it. Archaeologists have found bones here, traces of complex burials, and evidence that some people were sacrificed. And that's when it hits you. Life in Cahokia wasn't just about building mounds or trading corn. It was dark, brutal. The society that could plan, organize, and thrive also had a streak of something harsher, something almost unimaginable from your modern perspective. You swallow hard. The wind picks up again, rattling the few remaining wooden posts you can see from ancient structures. You imagine a crowd, maybe hundreds, gathered for a ritual long ago, chanting, offering, sacrificing. You shiver. Not because it's cold, the sun is still high, but because the earth remembers. It doesn't forget. And as much as you try to step lightly, the city seems to know you're intruding. You crouch over a shallow depression at the base of another mound. Something glints in the soil. You dig gently with your fingers and uncover a fragment of carved stone. Small, intricate, worn by centuries of earth pressing against it. You hold it up to the light. Could be a ceremonial object. Could be a tool. Could be something that once had power. Hard to tell, and that's part of the appeal. Nothing here is straightforward. Nothing is comfortable. As you move on, you notice the spacing between mounds is deliberate, almost coded. Plazas, ceremonial areas, residential. You step away from the burial mounds and the hidden depressions, trying to shake the unease that clings to your skin like damp moss. But the city isn't done reminding you who's in charge. The past has a long memory, and you're very clearly an outsider. You follow a faint path, the earth firm beneath your boots, dotted with small shards of pottery and fragments of tools. Every step feels like trespassing in a place that once thrived with human presence. And yet, it's oddly comforting, because even though the city is silent now, it still hums faintly with traces of life. You notice the first remnants of daily life. A broken clay vessel, charred at the bottom from countless fires long extinguished. Someone once cooked in this pot, stirred stew with care, perhaps muttered complaints over missing corn or an overly ambitious child. You imagine the scene, the smoke curling up into a sky that may have been just as bright as today. The vessel is heavy in your hand, worn smooth along the edges. Small, insignificant, but it tells a story. A story of people who lived, who laughed, who made mistakes. And now you hold it. Congrats, the past is tangible. For a moment, that's thrilling. Around the plaza, you see evidence of trade, exotic shells from distant rivers, copper fragments that glint faintly in the sunlight, stones that clearly didn't originate nearby. Cahokia wasn't isolated. It was a hub, a magnet, a trading empire before anyone thought empires could exist here. Someone here probably bragged about their rare shell necklace while plotting which cornfield to raid next. You wonder what they'd think of you now, crouched and studying bits of stone with reverent intensity. Probably, weird flex, but okay. The wind brushes through tall grass, carrying the faintest scent of burned earth, or maybe just your imagination running wild. You crouch over a shallow trench, brushing away dirt to reveal a perfectly intact arrowhead. Sharp, black, and deliberately crafted for killing. It's a tiny masterpiece, and also a subtle reminder, survival here wasn't about aesthetics. It was about food, defense, and sometimes offense. And you, with your modern shoes and soft hands, feel very, very unprepared. As you move deeper into the city, the residential mounds appear. Simple structures, wooden posts that have long rotted away, mud walls that succumbed to wind and rain centuries ago. Imagine families crammed into these tiny huts, the heat of summer pressing against thin walls, the stink of smoke and cooking mingling with the scent of animals. No AC, no running water, no privacy, no concept of personal space beyond what a dirt floor could provide. You can almost hear a frustrated parent muttering, "Why is the corn not done yet?" And realize life then was grittier than your most stressful day at work. You notice the streets, well, streets if you squint, lined with small deposits of artifacts. Cooking stones, pottery fragments, tools worn smooth by repeated use. It's repetitive, yes, but it tells you something crucial. This was a city alive with routine. People didn't just exist, they worked, traded, celebrated, fought, and died. The mundane stuff, the little details, the repeated patterns of life, are more eerie than the grand mounds. Because this city thrived for centuries on its careful order, and yet all that work, all that planning, could not protect it from the collapse waiting on the horizon. And now, let's talk about food because yes, someone had to eat here. Beans, squash, fish from rivers, deer from the forest, cornfields that stretched for miles, tended with sweat and perhaps quiet curses. You imagine the market, the bustling trade, the negotiation, the occasional theft, the children tripping over pottery shards while elders scold. It's oddly comforting, the thought that people here dealt with the same small frustrations you do. Except, of course, they couldn't call a pizza delivery service. You smirk. Progress is relative. You pause at another mound and spot a few carefully arranged stones, traces of storage pits for food. You wander past the residential mounds, your boots pressing into earth worn smooth by centuries of footsteps you will never count. The sun has moved higher, but the shadows here are still long, stretching across ceremonial spaces like fingers pointing at you. You feel them, subtle and insistent, the remnants of rituals, of power, of people trying desperately to control forces they didn't fully understand. And now you're standing in the middle of it, an uninvited observer. The woodhenge catches your attention first. The circle of enormous posts, half-buried and rotting, arranged with mathematical precision that would make a modern surveyor weep with envy. You imagine someone here, long ago, standing in the center of the circle, raising arms to the sky, counting the sun's path, marking solstices, or maybe just pretending they understood the universe. You step closer, and the wind whistles through the remaining posts. The sound is low, almost mournful, like a sigh from the earth itself. You notice tiny scraps of pigment on one post, faint red and yellow traces that time didn't fully erase. Symbolism, offerings, or just decoration? You can't tell. And maybe you never will. You crouch to examine the base, brushing away loose dirt, and feel the intentionality. Every post, every mark, every placement was deliberate. Someone cared enough to organize their world with ritual precision. And that care, that obsession, is what makes this city both magnificent and terrifying. You move toward a mound slightly larger than the others, its flat top giving it a subtle authority over the surrounding earth. Evidence suggests ceremonies were conducted here, gatherings of people whose lives revolved around sun, moon, and the unseen forces they believed governed existence. You imagine drums beating, chants rising, the occasional cry of someone chosen for, well, something you don't want to think too hard about. And yet, here you are, centuries later, standing in the aftermath, feeling the faint pull of energy that survived time. The deeper you go, the more unsettling it becomes. Small pits, almost invisible under grass, contain traces of human remains. Carefully positioned, sometimes accompanied by artifacts. Sacrifices? Offerings? A warning to the living? Your imagination fills in the gaps, and it's unpleasant. You shiver, brushing off the thought. These were people, not props for a horror story. But you can't shake the feeling that their deaths were meant to teach lessons, exert control, or appease powers that demanded blood and obedience. And it's not all solemnity. You notice a rhythm, a pattern in how mounds, plazas, and ceremonial spaces are arranged. Order, alignment, repetition. There's pride here, devotion, and perhaps a hint of fear. You picture leaders, high-ranking figures, orchestrating events that everyone attended, willingly or unwillingly, making sure the city's heartbeat stayed steady, predictable, controllable. You realize this wasn't just religion. It was power. Structured, terrifying, and very human. You crouch beside a post hole and brush your fingers over tiny fragments, shells, stones, traces of pigment. These small remnants are clues, whispers of rituals you can't fully reconstruct. Perhaps they marked births, deaths, harvests, or times when people begged the gods for mercy. Or perhaps they marked times when the powerful reminded the powerless that they were, well, powerless. You feel a chill. Civilization thrives on order, and Cahokia was no exception. The wind picks up, carrying faint scents of decay and earth. You imagine hundreds of people standing here centuries ago, performing rites, making offerings, chanting. The rituals weren't just spiritual, they were societal glue, binding the population together, controlling behavior, reinforcing hierarchy. And when you think about it, it's not all that different from modern life, just with fewer spreadsheets and more blood. You can't help a dark chuckle. You notice faint depressions in the earth near the ceremonial mound, subtle, deliberate, perhaps hiding graves or sacrificial pits. The city holds its secrets carefully, layering life, death, and ritual atop one another. You wander away from the ceremonial mounds, the echo of past rituals still lingering faintly in the grass, and start to notice the cracks. Not literal ones, though the earth has its own wrinkles, but the cracks in the life once woven across this city. Cahokia didn't vanish overnight. Civilization rarely does. It sputters, falters, and slowly peels back, layer by layer, until the city you walked into feels more like a ghost than a memory. And you? You're standing in the middle of its slow undoing. The first hint is the soil itself. Some patches are pale and dry, the grass thin, the earth brittle underfoot. Archaeologists suggest droughts, extended periods of heat and scarcity that would have crippled the crops this city depended on. Corn, beans, squash, the staples that fed thousands, would have struggled to survive. And as you step carefully, avoiding the hidden depressions, you realize just how fragile a city of earthen mounds can be. One bad season, one failed harvest, and the people here were in serious trouble. You notice remnants of defensive structures, or at least what might have been defensive. Small trenches, slight elevations, post holes that could have supported walls. Conflict? It's possible. The city was sprawling, ambitious, and undoubtedly envied by neighboring communities. And when resources dry up, when drought and hunger tighten their grip, diplomacy can fail, and survival becomes messy. You can almost hear the whispered arguments, the shouts, the clatter of stone weapons against wood. You shiver. Civilization doesn't collapse gracefully. Everywhere you look, there are signs of abandonment. Smaller mounds show less care, less evidence of continuous use. The city that was once meticulously organized starts to feel haphazard, chaotic even. People left in stages, taking what they could carry and leaving what they couldn't. You imagine hurried departures, children trailing behind parents, elders struggling to keep up, pots left to crack in the sun. And the irony? All that careful planning, all that labor, vanished with little more than a sigh from the earth. The mounds themselves bear subtle testimony to struggle. Some terraces eroded faster than expected, perhaps neglected, perhaps deliberately dismantled by desperate residents scavenging materials. You step carefully over crumbling edges, and it's impossible not to feel the weight of decay. You realize that Cahokia wasn't just a city under external pressure. It was also a city fighting against time, weather, and its own ambition. And ambition, as you know, can be a dangerous companion. You stumble across a cluster of smaller mounds that seem almost out of place, scattered in ways that suggest hurried or incomplete construction. Were they defensive? Residential expansions? Or desperate attempts to maintain control over a population growing restless and hungry? It's impossible to know. Archaeologists can speculate, but the earth remains cryptic. And that's part of the allure and the horror. The city whispers answers, but only just out of reach. The wind picks up, rustling through the grass, carrying the faint scent of old fire and dry earth. You imagine smoke rising from abandoned hearths, unattended for weeks or months. Cornfields once thriving now wilt under relentless sun. Trade networks fray, shells from distant rivers no longer arrive. The city's heartbeat falters, and you, standing among its remnants, can feel it in the subtle unevenness of the earth beneath your feet. And yet, humans being humans, you imagine they tried. Leaders likely made decisions in panic, communities banded together, maybe even rituals increased, desperate prayers, sacrifices, attempts to regain control over forces they couldn't understand. You crouch by a mound that shows signs of ritual deposits during this period. The objects feel deliberate, almost frantic. Someone wanted to appease something or someone before it was too late. But it was. You step lightly across the grass, aware that every mound beneath your feet has been both a shield and a storybook for centuries. And now, modern hands, gloved, careful, methodical, have begun to pry those stories open. Archaeologists arrived long after Cahokia had vanished, carrying trowels, brushes, and an insatiable curiosity. You imagine them hunched over dirt, peeling back layers with reverence and dread, uncovering fragments that tell tales of life, death, and obsession. The first discoveries were obvious: bones, pottery shards, stone tools. But the deeper they dug, the stranger the city became. Not just in scale, but in intention. Certain mounds, previously assumed to be simple platforms or burial sites, revealed complex structures beneath: wooden posts arranged with mathematical precision, layered floors, and artifacts deliberately placed. Each layer felt like a message from the past, waiting for the right eyes to read it. You crouch and brush away some dirt, imagining what it would have been like to uncover a perfectly preserved skeleton or a ceremonial object buried centuries earlier. You shiver. And then there were the graves. Some contained single individuals, carefully positioned, perhaps a chief, a revered elder, or a figure of mystery lost to time. Others were communal, a chilling reminder of mortality in a society that thrived on spectacle and ritual. Archaeologists found evidence that some were buried with objects, tools, ornaments, shells, stones, tokens of life, or perhaps offerings to guide the dead. You can almost hear their silent whispers, carried faintly through the layers of earth. Remember us. Understand us. Fear us a little. The artifacts themselves are fascinating, almost frustrating in their detail. Tiny beads, elaborately carved stone effigies, copper implements. So small, so meticulous, yet so impossibly ancient. You handle an arrowhead fragment, smooth with age, and think about the person who shaped it, polished it, and then likely prayed it would serve a purpose beyond mere survival. Every object is a message, a breadcrumb, a fragment of consciousness frozen in soil, waiting for someone to stumble upon it centuries later. Congratulations, that someone is you. You notice patterns emerging from the chaos. Burial sites aligned with celestial events. Certain artifacts consistently appear in specific mounds. Layers of earth reveal repeated human activity, rituals, feasts, sacrifices. Archaeologists call it structure, careful organization. You call it meticulous obsession. And as you walk past a series of post holes revealed in a recent dig, you realize that Cahokia wasn't just a city. It was a story meticulously written in dirt, wood, and bone, a narrative that continues to unfold with each careful brushstroke. One of the more unsettling discoveries came from high-ranking mounds. Some contained evidence of human sacrifice. Not a lot, mind you, not Hollywood levels, but enough to remind you that the city's power came at a cost. Bones showing trauma, carefully positioned bodies, sometimes accompanied by ceremonial items. You crouch, imagining the ceremonies, the chants, the fear, the obedience. And you wonder, could anyone in this modern age truly understand it? Probably not. But archaeologists try, patient and relentless, brushing centuries of dirt to reveal the echoes of devotion and terror. Then there's the woodhenge, reconstructed partially in recent decades. its posts revealing alignments with solstices and equinoxes. Archaeologists studied it like astronomers, mapping the sun's movements through the circle. And you, standing in the shadow of these enormous posts, can't help but feel the same chill as those ancient observers. They too were looking for order, patterns, meaning. And they, too, left their lives in the hands of forces beyond comprehension. You step through the posts and feel a subtle shift, as if the earth itself is reminding you that observation is never neutral. Excavations also revealed trade networks, visible in the scattered shells, copper fragments, and exotic stones far from their. You move quietly across the mounds, aware that beneath each footfall lies centuries of secrets. Archaeologists have already uncovered a lot, yes, but Cahokia is patient. It doesn't spill its mysteries all at once. You sense it here. The soil seems heavier, denser, as though it's guarding something just beyond reach. And in a way it is. The first thing you notice is the subtle shift in the earth. The grass thins. The contours of the ground are almost imperceptibly different. You stoop, running your hand along the surface, imagining the countless hands that have walked over this land, and realize this might be a burial no one had yet marked. Hidden graves. Some carefully prepared, others hurried, some containing individuals of unknown status. You can almost hear a faint echo. Not everything wants to be found. Unearthed skeletons often tell stories that words cannot. Some show clear signs of ritual placement, bodies positioned deliberately, sometimes with artifacts carefully arranged at the sides, beads, shells, fragments of tools, or small ceremonial objects. Occasionally, there's evidence of trauma, blunt force, cutting tools, signs that life ended abruptly, violently. You crouch, imagining the scene centuries ago. A city thriving, yet underpinned by rituals that demanded obedience, compliance, and sometimes sacrifice. It's unsettling to think about. Then there are the anomalies, the artifacts that archaeologists never expected to find. Tiny figurines, intricately carved stone pieces, ceremonial objects that suggest practices outside of previously understood patterns. Some are isolated, hidden in pits or beneath other layers of earth, as if deliberately concealed. You can't help but wonder, were they lost? Buried for safekeeping? Or hidden to appease forces unseen? Cahokia seems to delight in these unanswered questions. Some graves contain multiple individuals. Family members? Or perhaps groups sacrificed together. The arrangements vary, sometimes appearing rushed, sometimes meticulous. Archaeologists debate their purpose, leaving the past open to interpretation. You bend closer, imagining the deliberation, the fear, the finality. Human life, layered in soil, speaking through absence. It's intimate. It's cruel. And you, the observer, feel the weight of it pressing on your shoulders. Artifacts recovered from hidden graves often contradict earlier assumptions. Trade items buried deep suggest connections across great distances. Copper from afar, shells from distant rivers, exotic stones with origins you cannot trace. Some objects seem purely ceremonial, useless for everyday life but rich in symbolism. You hold one, smooth and polished, wondering who once held it. Did it bring comfort? Fear? Authority? And why bury it, almost secretively, beneath the earth, if not for power? You wander to a mound partially excavated, noting the faint outlines of multiple burials layered atop one another. Time here is not linear. It folds. Past and present intersect, bodies and artifacts stacked as if the city knew centuries later someone would attempt to understand its logic. You step back, brushing the dirt from your hands, and feel a shiver. History is patient, but it is also precise. Every placement is intentional, every concealment deliberate. There's an eerie beauty in these discoveries. Despite the violence, despite the abandonment, you can sense reverence. Someone carefully placed each item, each body, each artifact with a purpose. Even in secrecy, even in death, Cahokia's inhabitants were narrators of their world. And now you are the listener, piecing together a story the city never fully intended to reveal. Wind rustles across the grass, carrying the faint, intangible scent of old soil, of history unturned. You imagine archaeologists slowly brushing centuries of. You wander past the hidden graves, the unearthed bones fading from immediate view, yet lingering in the back of your mind like a quiet admonition. Now, the city reveals itself in fragments of daily life, shards of pottery, carved tools, remnants of meals long since devoured. You stoop to pick up a fragment of a clay vessel, its edges worn smooth by centuries, imagining the hands that molded it, the meal it once contained, and the quiet chatter of a family that no longer exists. The first thing you notice is how practical it all was. Stone knives, arrowheads, grinding stones, tools of survival, of sustenance, of making life function day by day. Someone here woke up, planned meals, traded with neighbors, and hunted or fished, much like we do now, only with more immediate consequences if they failed. You brush your fingers over a small grinding stone and can almost feel the repetitive motion of years of labor. Mundane, yes, but there's something humbling about it. Life survived through the ordinary. Pottery fragments are equally revealing. Some are plain, utilitarian, designed to hold food or water. Others are decorated, painted, carved, perhaps used in rituals or ceremonies. You can almost imagine someone carefully etching symbols into the clay, humming a quiet tune, thinking, "This will last longer than I will." It's ironic, isn't it? The ordinary was also a canvas for memory and devotion. Even the most mundane object could carry meaning beyond its immediate function. You move through the mounds, and the artifacts suggest patterns of movement and labor. Tools for farming appear near the edges of mounds. Trade goods cluster around plazas. Ceremonial objects pepper select sites. Life here was meticulously organized, and yet there's an underlying rhythm that hints at tension. Farming, trading, crafting, it all operated alongside rituals and ceremonies, reminders that existence in Cahokia was never neutral. Every action had context, significance, and sometimes consequence. You pick up a small piece of carved stone, possibly a toy, a token, or a ceremonial object. It's impossible to tell. And yet, that ambiguity is precisely what makes the city alive. You can picture a child clutching this object while adults performed their duties, rituals humming in the background. Daily life and ritual were intertwined here, inseparable. A meal wasn't just sustenance. A meal was part of the broader fabric of society, threaded with meaning, obligation, and perhaps fear. Grinding stones, hearths, storage pits, these mundane items reveal survival strategies. Corn, beans, squash. Deerfish, small game. You imagine women and men laboring, cooking, grinding, ensuring enough food to last a week, a month, a season. And yet, some of the same artifacts appear in ceremonial contexts, perhaps offerings, perhaps leftovers, perhaps reminders that even the ordinary required acknowledgement of unseen forces. Life and ritual coexisted, inseparably bound, and you feel the subtle weight of that knowledge pressing in. Trade artifacts add another layer to the picture. Shells from rivers hundreds of miles away, exotic stones, copper fragments, all showing that Cahokia wasn't isolated. Daily life here included negotiation, commerce, and social hierarchies. Someone might have bartered a basket of corn for a necklace, while children ran between huts, adults shouted instructions, and elders oversaw the rituals. You step carefully over shards, imagining the bustle. And yet, centuries later, the city is silent. The ordinary and the extraordinary collapsed into quiet earth, leaving only fragments. You crouch over a hearth site, noticing faint blackened residue on stones. Fire, life warmth. Someone here used this hearth, day after day, perhaps mumbling complaints, persists and plains, long before anyone thought about highways or commerce in the modern sense. Shells catch your eye first. Tiny, delicate, iridescent, far from any local river. Someone carried these, bartered them, perhaps treasured them as status symbols, carefully placing them in graves or in the homes of elites. You crouch to examine one, imagining the journey, miles of forest, sweltering heat, river crossings, negotiations, and then finally, this shell resting in a mound or pit, quiet but significant. The act of possession itself is a story, a demonstration of reach and influence. long before trade deals were signed in offices with coffee machines. Copper is another clue. Thin fragments, shaped into ornaments or ceremonial implements, possibly from distant sources hundreds of miles away. You hold a piece up to the light, noticing its greenish tinge from age and oxidation, imagining someone polishing it carefully, showing it off, offering it as tribute, or burying it with someone they hoped would remember them forever. Trade here wasn't just about survival, it was about hierarchy, prestige, and signaling power. Someone clever could wield influence across vast regions without ever leaving the city. You smirk, thinking how modern politicians would envy this subtle efficiency. Stone tools from distant quarries reveal yet another layer. Archaeologists have traced some materials hundreds of miles, mapping the invisible highways carved by human ambition and necessity. Cahokia wasn't just receiving goods. It was a node, a destination, a place where ideas, technologies, and cultural practices converged. Imagine someone showing up from a distant village, carefully negotiating for food, tools, or artifacts, leaving behind traces of foreign styles, symbols, or techniques. It's almost like a conference center without walls, without schedules, without signage, but pulsating with activity. And then there's food. Corn, beans, squash, staples of daily life, were supplemented by exotic plants, fish, or game from surrounding regions. Someone here, long ago, knew how to secure resources that extended beyond local rivers. Trading for necessities and luxuries alike, they crafted a web of influence that reached across the Mississippi Valley. You step carefully across a mound, imagining the smell of fish drying, corn roasting, and the subtle hum of commerce in the background. The city was alive not just in its streets and mounds, but in the invisible currents that carried goods, culture, and ideas. Artifacts reveal hints of hierarchy intertwined with trade. Some items were common, others clearly reserved for elites. Shell necklaces, finely carved stone figurines, or copper fragments might decorate the homes of the powerful or accompany burials of the influential. You crouch and imagine the politics behind these objects, the subtle manipulation, the negotiation, the silent assertion of status. Trade was not neutral here. It reinforced order, hierarchy, and control. Even small objects, small actions, conveyed power and prestige across vast distances. You notice patterns in the placement of artifacts across mounds and plazas. They aren't random. Some mounds receive exotic goods, some ceremonial objects, some burials with faraway treasures. The city's layout mirrors its networks. Central plazas act as gathering points, peripheral mounds as nodes for collection, distribution, or observation. Cahokia itself is a map written in earth and artifacts, showing you step across the mounds, brushing dirt from your hands, and start to notice the patterns, the subtle distinctions in mound size, artifact distribution, and burial practices. Cahokia was not an egalitarian place. Not by any stretch. The city had a social order, rigid and deliberate, visible to anyone paying attention. You are paying attention. The earth itself seems to insist on it. Monk's mound towers above the surrounding landscape, a silent testament to authority. It isn't just a mound, it's a throne, a stage, a proclamation of power. You imagine leaders here, looking down at the city, orchestrating ceremonies, monitoring trade, issuing commands. Perhaps they sat in carefully constructed houses atop the mound, surrounded by artifacts, wealth, and reminders of their influence. You feel a subtle chill imagining the distance, social, psychological, even spiritual, between them and the common folk wandering the plazas below. Burial practices reinforce this hierarchy. High-status mounds contain multiple layers of interments, with bodies accompanied by elaborate artifacts. Copper, shells, exotic stones, finely carved figurines. Ordinary mounds? Just simple burials, perhaps a broken pot, a grinding stone, maybe an arrowhead. You crouch over a fragment of a shell necklace near a ceremonial mound, imagining the prestige it conferred. Power, even in death, was visible, tangible, and meticulously curated. Artifacts themselves hint at daily reinforcement of social structures. Only certain people had access to the best tools, finest pottery, or most exotic trade items. And why not? A city this large required coordination, hierarchy, and control. You can picture a high-ranking individual showing off a copper ornament to assert dominance, while workers, farmers, and traders kept the city running beneath their gaze. Life here wasn't fair. It was organized, efficient, and sometimes merciless. The city's layout emphasizes hierarchy, too. Central plazas, large mounds, ceremonial spaces, all reserved for the elite or for rituals they controlled. Peripheral areas house smaller mounds, storage pits, and residential sites. The placement isn't random. It's a subtle, spatial way of saying, know your place. You can almost hear the unspoken rules, murmured across centuries. Who speaks, who obeys, who participates, who observes. And standing here, you feel that tension between visibility and invisibility, authority and subservience, power and labor. You notice signs of elite activity in ceremonial spaces, remnants of feasts, ritual deposits, and post holes suggesting elevated platforms. Leaders likely staged elaborate events, demonstrating control over food, ritual, and people alike. And the common folk? They participated, watched, or served. You step lightly across the plaza, imagining the hum of human activity, the chatter, the labor, the careful choreography of hierarchy made visible through everyday acts. Even trade reinforced social divisions. Exotic goods, carefully curated artifacts, and ceremonial objects often went directly to elites. Commoners might witness the distribution, perhaps benefit indirectly, but the city's hierarchy ensured the most coveted items remained in the hands of the powerful. You pick up a shard of polished stone, thinking about how something so small could carry immense social weight. One fragment, one gesture, one item could define a life or elevate it. And yet, the hierarchy wasn't only about material wealth. It was also spiritual, ritualistic, symbolic. Leaders controlled ceremonies, determined who participated in sacrifices, and orchestrated rites that reinforced obedience. Power here intertwined with religion, ritual, and visibility, creating a system both subtle and absolute. You wander through Cahokia's sprawling landscape, brushing past mounds large and small, and begin to notice the subtle contrasts. Not all life here was equal. The elite, those perched atop the tallest mounds, wrapped in ceremonial significance, moved through a world of ritual, spectacle, and control. The common folk, meanwhile, occupied the shadows of these towering displays, their daily existence a mixture of labor, survival, and occasional participation in rites they barely understood. And you, of course, are walking between these worlds, invisible but very aware. The elite's rituals were deliberate and highly visible. Imagine a platform atop Monk's Mound, a leader adorned with shell ornaments, copper jewelry, and finely crafted attire, overseeing ceremonies, sacrifices, or festivals. You step carefully along the mound's edge, picturing drums, chants, and smoke curling skyward. Every gesture, every placement of objects, every nod to the sun or moon reinforced authority. Ritual was power made tangible, a spectacle that reminded the populace who controlled life, death, and the flow of resources. Meanwhile, commoners experienced rituals differently. They watched from below, participated when summoned, and contributed food, labor, or offerings to ensure they remained in favor. You crouch near a cluster of small mounds, imagining children running between huts, adults tending fields, and the occasional messenger relaying instructions from the elite. Daily life was laborious, repetitive, and disciplined. Food, clothing, shelter, all required effort, and much of that effort supported the rituals and comfort of the powerful. The city functioned like a well-oiled, if slightly ruthless, machine. Artifacts highlight these contrasts. Elaborate copper ornaments and shell necklaces appear in elite burials, alongside ceremonial objects meant for display or ritual performance. Meanwhile, simpler pottery, grinding stones, and everyday tools populate commoner sites. You pick up a broken clay shard and imagine the hands that shaped it, someone preparing meals, storing food, performing small rituals at home. It's mundane, yes, but it reflects a life tied tightly to the rhythms of the city and to the whims of those at the top. Some rituals involved direct participation. Communal dances, feasts, or sacrifices sometimes required commoners to perform specific roles. You can almost hear instructions: line up, carry the food, watch the ceremony, obey. The pressure of obligation is palpable, even from centuries away. The rituals were not only spiritual, they were political, reinforcing hierarchy, obedience, and social cohesion. And yet, for all the spectacle, the ordinary continued. Children played, farmers harvested, artisans crafted. Life persisted under the shadow of ceremony, resilient and exhausted at once. Trade and resources further delineated privilege. Exotic shells, copper, and rare artifacts rarely reached the hands of commoners. Instead, these items remained visible but inaccessible, reinforcing social hierarchy through scarcity. Meanwhile, everyday tools and materials sustained survival, allowing ordinary life to continue. You brush your fingers over a grinding stone, imagining it in the hands of a farmer or artisan whose work, unnoticed by the elite, kept the city alive. The contrast is stark: power displayed in ritual, survival enacted through labor. Even death reflected these divisions. Elite burials contained rich artifacts, ceremonial objects, and multiple layers of preparation, while commoner graves were simpler, functional, and often hastily executed. You imagine families burying loved ones, aware of their modest status, perhaps adding small tokens or offerings to honor the dead. The elite controlled visibility even in death, reinforcing distinctions that persisted long after life ended. You step back, feeling the weight of these differences pressing quietly across the cityscape. Congrats, you've witnessed the delicate balance between power and obligation in Cahokia. Elite rituals, grand and deliberate, dominated the skyline and psyche, while common life, essential and tired. You stop at the base of Monk's Mound, craning your neck. It rises above everything else in Cahokia, a massive, earthbound monument that dominates the landscape, casting a long shadow over plazas, smaller mounds, and the people who once lived beneath it. From this perspective, the mound isn't just a pile of earth, it's the statement. Ambition, authority, ritual, and control hewn from soil and sweat, layer by deliberate layer. You step closer, feeling the subtle vibration of centuries underfoot. Imagine the labor involved. Thousands of people hauling basket after basket of soil, carefully layering and compacting it. Heat, sweat, dust, and exhaustion. You can almost hear the grunts of effort, the occasional curse, the rhythm of coordinated movement. This was not a weekend project. Monk's Mound is the product of decades, possibly generations, of relentless human labor. And you, centuries later, are standing on the edge of the finished product, a silent witness to ambition frozen in earth. The mound isn't just a display of labor, it's symbolic, a platform for authority. Leaders perched atop, performing ceremonies, observing the city, and asserting dominance over both people and the cosmos. You imagine the view from above, plazas filled with observers, smaller mounds dotting the horizon, the Mississippi River glinting in the distance. Power in Cahokia wasn't whispered, it was demonstrated, monumentalized, and impossible to ignore. Artifacts and post holes at the summit reveal that structures once stood here. Residences, temples, or ceremonial platforms, spaces where leaders and perhaps priests performed rituals visible to the entire city. You crouch to brush away loose soil, imagining the careful placement of ceremonial objects, the preparation of offerings, the choreography of movement meant to awe, intimidate, and reinforce social hierarchy. The mound is both stage and storyteller, speaking across centuries of labor and devotion. Even the construction technique is revealing. Layers of soil and clay, sometimes alternating in texture and color, indicate planning, knowledge, and intention. The builders understood stability, aesthetics, and symbolism. Every layer has meaning, functional, structural, and spiritual. You run a hand along the compacted soil, feeling the deliberate craftsmanship. You're not touching dirt, you're touching the echoes of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people invested in creating permanence in a fleeting world. The sheer size of Monk's Mound amplifies its effect. From the plazas below, It must have seemed impossibly tall, almost otherworldly. You imagine the awe it inspired, children craning their necks, adults pausing mid-task, traders and commoners silently acknowledging the central authority. The mound itself enforces hierarchy, a reminder that some people, some rituals, and some spaces were inherently elevated above the rest. Physical elevation mirrored social and spiritual elevation. And it's not just spectacle, it's central to Cahokia's identity. The mound anchors plazas, roads, and smaller mounds, creating a spatial organization that reinforces both hierarchy and ritual. You notice alignments with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and other astronomical markers. The labor invested wasn't solely for human eyes, it was also for the sky, a communication with forces beyond comprehension. You step back, imagining the city alive with ceremony, labor, and observation, all revolving around this monumental center. Wind rustles through the surrounding grass, carrying faint whispers of centuries. Monk's Mound is patient, monumental, eternal. It doesn't demand attention so much as insist upon it, quietly and persistently. Every step you take around its base, every artifact you brush aside, every shadow that stretches across its terraces, is a reminder. This mound is both a product of human labor and a symbol of ambition, power, and ritual that refuses to be forgotten. Congrats, you felt the scale and significance of Monk's Mound. Layer by layer, it's a testament to ambition. You step away from Monk's Mound, its shadow stretching long across the city, and notice the smaller mounds dotting the landscape. They are subtle in comparison, modest terraces built with care, yet they carry their own stories. These were not centers of spectacle or power, they were homes, workshops, and spaces where ordinary life played out against the backdrop of monumental ambition. You crouch near a modest mound, imagining the people who once occupied it. Residences were simple, constructed with wooden posts, wattle and daub walls, and thatched roofs. You can almost see them now, smoke curling from hearths, the smell of cooking corn mingling with the earthy scent of wet clay. Children run between huts, chasing one another across packed earth, while adults grind corn, repair tools, or maintain storage pits. Life here was repetitive, practical, yet infused with the rhythms of survival and small celebrations that break monotony. And all of it exists beneath the silent gaze of Monk's Mound, a constant reminder of hierarchy. Artifacts scattered across these smaller mounds reveal hints of daily routines. Simple pottery fragments, broken tools, grinding stones, and the occasional personal adornments suggest ordinary people who worked, ate, and performed small rituals within the walls of their homes. You pick up a shard of clay, imagining the hands that shaped it, the meal it once contained. It's mundane, yes, but essential. Without these daily acts, the city would never have thrived. Monumental structures need ordinary life to give them meaning. The placement of mounds reflects both practicality and social order. Residences cluster near resources, water, fields, and trade routes. Streets and paths connect them, winding carefully through the city while aligning subtly with ceremonial spaces. You walk along one of these pathways, noticing how the spatial organization balances utility and hierarchy. Even ordinary life was structured, disciplined, and visible, carefully woven into the fabric of the city. Hearths and storage pits reveal both sustenance and ritual. Fires burned daily, but ashes suggest occasional ceremonial use. Perhaps a family made offerings of food to spirits, or quietly acknowledged the authority of the elite. Life was survival interlaced with observation, labor interwoven with participation in a broader system of power. You crouch, brushing soil from a small hearth, sensing the rhythm of countless days lived here, repetitive and persistent. Children's toys and small personal items appear occasionally. Carved stones, tiny figurines, and simple jewelry hint at joy, curiosity, and familial bonds that survived beneath layers of labor and hierarchy. You imagine a child clutching a carved animal while adults prepared meals or tended fields, learning the boundaries of social order even as they played. Life in these mounds was ordinary, intimate, and completely dependent on the monumental structures towering above them. Trade goods trickle down here as well, though more sparingly than atop ceremonial mounds. Shells, copper fragments, and exotic stones occasionally appear, indicating modest wealth or familial connections. You handle a small shell bead, imagining its journey from a distant river to this humble dwelling. Even ordinary people participated in the broader web of trade, ritual, and social order, though always in the shadow of authority. Wind brushes across the grass, rustling loose soil and small artifacts. The mounds are quiet now, yet they hum with memory. Daily life in Cahokia was persistent and precise, sustained by ordinary people whose labor, observation, and small rituals kept the city alive. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, and feel the subtle interplay of scale and significance. Monk's Mound dominates, yes, but these smaller mounds, humble and human, reveal the heartbeat that sustained it. Congrats, you've glimpsed the ordinary life surrounding monumental ambition. Daily labor, modest dwellings, and small rituals persisted quietly. You step away from the residential mounds, following paths worn into the earth, and arrive at the plazas, the city's open lungs, spaces where people gathered, exchanged, and observed one another. These are not mere empty patches of land. They are stages, marketplaces, and theaters of social life. You pause, letting your gaze sweep across the flat expanses, imagining the countless footsteps that once moved rhythmically across the soil. Plazas were the centers of interaction, places where daily life met ceremonial spectacle. You can picture merchants setting up stalls, offering shells, pottery, woven mats, and food from distant rivers and fields. Farmers bring surplus corn, beans, and squash, while artisans display carved stones or copper fragments. The air would have been thick with voices, smells, and movement, a symphony of survival, barter, and subtle competition. You bend slightly, tracing the layout of a sunken depression, imagining it once served as a staging area for trade or performance. Social interaction in the plazas was complex. The elite controlled visibility, asserting authority from mounds or raised platforms. Commoners moved through the space, trading goods, sharing news, or preparing for ritual participation. You step carefully over a faint depression that may have held a temporary structure, imagining the flow of people, children darting between adults, laborers carrying goods, performers and priests drawing attention. Life here was public, performative, and subtly controlled. Evidence suggests plazas were used for large communal gatherings, from feasts to ceremonies. You crouch, brushing dirt from a small artifact, imagining a crowd assembled, drums beating, chants rising, fire crackling. Every gesture, every arrangement of objects, and every participant's placement reinforced hierarchy and order. And yet, within this spectacle, ordinary life continued. Food was prepared, children watched, trades occurred, and obligations were met. The plazas were a nexus, a crossroads of ritual, commerce, and social cohesion. Trade was vital here, both practical and symbolic. Shells from distant rivers, stones from quarries hundreds of miles away, and finely crafted objects circulated through these spaces. You imagine a young artisan offering a carved figurine, hoping to curry favor with an elite or secure a barter that would sustain the family. Every transaction carried weight, economic, social, and occasionally political. Even small exchanges reinforced the city's structure, linking survival, prestige, and obedience. Plazas also hosted festivals, rituals, and games. Archaeologists have uncovered post holes and other features suggesting temporary structures for performances or ritual activities. You can almost hear the rhythm of drums, the collective pulse of participants, and the whispered awe of spectators. These gatherings reinforced the social hierarchy: who could speak, who could act, who observed, and who served. Participation was both a duty and a privilege, and failure to respect these rules could have consequences both subtle and severe. Children, too, were present, learning the social dynamics as they watched elders, artisans, and leaders. You picture them running, laughing, imitating, absorbing lessons about order, hierarchy, and ritual. Even play carried weight in this highly structured environment. Every act, every gesture, every laugh was observed in context, teaching the next generation how to survive, participate, and respect authority. The plazas connected the city physically and socially. Paths led from residential mounds to ceremonial mounds, from markets to ritual spaces, weaving a network of interaction visible across the city. You walk along one such path, noting the subtle alignment with Monk's Mound and other central points. The arrangement is deliberate. Movement, observation, and gathering were orchestrated, just like the rituals themselves. Congrats, you've entered the heart of Cahokia, the plazas where daily life, trade, and ritual intersected. The space hums with the memory of countless interactions. You step away from the bustling plazas, your feet pressing into the packed earth of fields that once fed thousands. Cahokia was not a city sustained by luck. Survival here depended on careful planning, tireless labor, and an understanding of the land that bordered on genius. Corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters, were cultivated with precision, forming the backbone of life, and every hill, ridge, and depression played a role in producing food for the massive population. The fields themselves were organized meticulously. Raised beds, irrigation ditches, and fertile terraces demonstrate a system built for efficiency and productivity. You crouch, brushing soil from a patch of earth, imagining the hands that prepared it, planting seeds in perfect rows, nurturing crops day by day. Sweat, effort, patience, all invested in sustaining life in a city that could easily demand more than the land could give. The scale is staggering, the foresight immense. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of crop rotation, evidence of soil management, and storage pits designed to preserve surplus. You can picture long-term planning, storing corn for harsh winters, ensuring beans would provide nitrogen to enrich the soil, carefully monitoring the balance between consumption and preservation. Daily survival here was tied directly to observation, labor, and knowledge passed down through generations. You step lightly, aware that every mound and mound cluster depends, ultimately, on the productivity of these fields. Food distribution was another layer of complexity. Plazas and storage pits suggest centralized management, perhaps overseen by the elite or specialized administrators. You imagine baskets of corn being carried to plazas, distributed during festivals, or reserved for ritual offerings. Survival intertwined with social order, access to food was both practical and symbolic. Hunger could destabilize a city, and the elite ensured the system functioned, or at least appeared to function, smoothly. Hunting and fishing supplemented agriculture. Archaeological evidence points to deer, fish, small mammals, and waterfowl as part of the diet. You picture individuals venturing into nearby forests or rivers, returning with catches to feed their families, to trade, or to contribute to communal feasts. The ordinary residents provided not just daily sustenance but also ritual offerings, reinforcing the integration of survival and ceremony. Cooking and food preparation reveal the rhythms of ordinary life. Hearths, grinding stones, and pottery fragments suggest meticulous work, grinding corn, roasting meat, and preparing meals with care and repetition. You imagine families working side by side, children assisting in small tasks, all under the watchful eye of tradition and hierarchy. Each meal, while necessary for survival, also reinforced daily structure, obligations, and community. Seasonal changes dictated labor cycles. Planting, harvesting, and storing required careful coordination, while rituals marked transitions. Planting festivals, harvest celebrations, and offerings to deities or ancestors. You can almost hear the soft chants accompanying work in the fields, the rhythm of daily toil synchronized with ceremonial life. Survival and devotion were inseparable in Cahokia. Trade complemented agriculture. Exotic shells, copper fragments, and stones arrived in exchange for surplus crops, demonstrating that the city's food system supported not just local survival but also regional influence. You pick up a small shell bead found in a residential mound, imagining how it arrived from afar, traded for corn or beans, tying ordinary life to far-reaching networks of commerce. Congrats, you've walked among Cahokia's lifeblood, the fields, storage pits, and workspaces that sustained a civilization. Labor, observation, planning, and ritual combined to feed a city capable of monumental achievement. You straighten, brushing soil from your hands, and realize that without careful management of the earth and its bounty, none of the mounds, plazas, or rituals you've explored would have been possible. The city's heartbeat, quiet yet persistent, resided in these fields and the hands that tended them. You step lightly across the mounds, pausing to examine fragments of pottery, smoothed stones, and carefully carved figurines half buried in the soil. These artifacts are more than tools or vessels. They are expressions of identity, belief, and creativity. Life in Cahokia was both practical and symbolic, and the hands that shaped clay, carved stone, and polished copper left traces that speak across centuries. You crouch, brushing dirt from a small piece of pottery, imagining the rhythm of creation. Pottery was everywhere. Plain vessels for grinding and storing corn, yes, but also painted, engraved, or decorated objects meant for ritual or display. You pick up a shard with faint designs, lines, spirals, perhaps representations of the sun, water, or animals. Someone long ago spent hours etching these symbols, perhaps thinking about stories, ancestors, or spiritual forces. Ordinary life merged with the extraordinary. Even a simple bowl could carry meaning far beyond its function. Stone tools reveal remarkable skill. Knives, scrapers, and arrowheads were crafted with precision, shaped carefully to suit specific tasks. You hold a small, polished point and feel the intention behind it. This was not merely survival. It was craft, discipline, and ingenuity. The artisan's hands, guided by knowledge passed down through generations, ensured each object served purpose, beauty, and perhaps symbolism. Ordinary labor and artistic effort intertwined seamlessly. Symbolic carvings appear occasionally, small figurines, animal effigies, and abstract designs. Some are clearly ritual objects, placed in graves or ceremonial mounds, while others may have been personal tokens, charms, or toys. You can almost see a person carefully shaping a small stone bird, imagining its intended role, protection, devotion, or teaching. Each piece is a whisper from the past, a hint of imagination persisting through centuries of silence. Copper artifacts reveal another layer of sophistication. Thin sheets molded into ornaments, ceremonial implements, or decorative pieces show both skill and access to rare materials. You lift a small fragment, noting its patina, imagining the countless hours of polishing, shaping, and arranging it for someone's display or burial. Craft here is not only functional, it is a statement of status, ritual, and identity. Even creativity reinforced hierarchy. Craft production likely occurred in workshops or specialized areas. Archaeologists have uncovered concentrations of tools, unfinished objects, and waste material, suggesting deliberate spaces for production. You step carefully around scattered shards and fragments, picturing artisans working side by side, the smell of wet clay, the steady tap of stone tools. Daily labor and creative expression were inseparable, forming the foundation of both survival and culture. Trade intertwined with craft. Exotic materials, copper from distant regions, shells from faraway rivers, and rare stones, were transformed into objects that circulated throughout the city and beyond. You can almost trace the journey: miner, trader, artisan, elite collector. Each step imbues the object with context, social meaning, and value. Craft was not merely creative, it was a conduit for communication, power, and cultural continuity. Even the smallest objects tell stories of ritual, daily life, and belief. Figurines placed in burials suggest spiritual intention, tools buried in specific ways hint at ceremonial significance, and intricately decorated pottery conveys symbolism we can only begin to interpret. You crouch, brushing dirt from a carved stone, feeling the quiet dialogue between past and present. The city speaks, patiently, through its artifacts. Congrats, you've glimpsed Cahokia's creativity, skill, and symbolic depth. Pottery, tools, carvings, and copper artifacts reveal a culture that valued function, beauty, and ritual in equal measure. You straighten, brushing, you walk quietly across Cahokia's landscape, aware that every mound, plaza, and pathway once vibrated with unseen forces. Religion here was not a private affair. It was public, omnipresent, and inseparable from daily life. The city itself was structured around spiritual power, each mound, each post hole, each artifact hinting at rituals performed to honor gods, ancestors, or celestial bodies. You pause, sensing the weight of centuries, and feel as if the earth itself remembers. Ceremonies were elaborate and deliberate. Elevated mounds hosted rituals visible to thousands of onlookers. You can imagine drums beating in rhythm, fire crackling, and chants rising to the sky. Leaders adorned in copper, shell, and feathers performed acts designed to ensure fertility, prosperity, and cosmic favor. You step softly, brushing aside loose soil, imagining the awe these ceremonies inspired. Life and belief intertwined, and hierarchy was enforced through spectacle. Sacrifice, though limited, played a role. Archaeological evidence shows carefully positioned human remains and symbolic offerings, often associated with high-status mounds. You crouch near a shallow depression and imagine the solemnity. A life offered not wantonly, but as part of a ritual that connected the living with forces beyond comprehension. Fear, reverence, and obedience merged in these acts, leaving traces that persist in soil, bone, and artifact. Daily religious practice extended to ordinary people. Hearths, storage pits, and small artifacts suggest that families performed small rituals at home, offering thanks, protection, or guidance to ancestors or spirits. You imagine a quiet morning, grinding corn, whispering prayers, placing a token in a corner, reinforcing spiritual bonds even as ordinary life continued. Ritual and survival were inseparable threads woven into the city's fabric. Symbolism pervaded artifacts and structures. Animal figurines, carved stones, and painted pottery hint at cosmology, spiritual narratives, and moral lessons. You pick up a small carved stone and trace the delicate etching, imagining the person who shaped it thinking, this represents balance, power, protection. Every object, no matter how small, carried intention. Even tools could serve dual purposes, practical in life, symbolic in death. The city's layout reflects spiritual organization. Monk's Mound, smaller mounds, plazas, and woodhenges align with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. You stand at the edge of a mound, imagining someone centuries ago observing the sun's path, organizing ritual spaces in accordance with cosmic rhythms. Religion dictated orientation, movement, and experience. Life was measured not only by labor and survival but also by alignment with forces far larger than humans. Woodhenges, circular arrangements of massive posts, reinforced this connection to the cosmos. You walk among the faint outlines of post holes, imagining the precision required to mark solstices and equinoxes. Observing the sky, priests or leaders determine the timing of planting, harvesting, ceremonies, and sacrifices. Religion was both spiritual and practical, a framework guiding survival, hierarchy, and community cohesion. Even the smallest gestures mattered. Placing a shell in a burial, carving a symbol into pottery, or aligning a post hole with the sun signified participation in the spiritual order. You pick up a tiny bead, imagining its journey from creation to ritual, and feel the subtle continuity of belief persisting through generations. Cahokia's people lived within a world where the sacred and ordinary were inseparable. Congrats, you've glimpsed the spiritual heartbeat of Cahokia. Rituals, sacrifices, woodhenges, and symbolic artifacts reveal a culture attuned to forces both human and cosmic. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, and feel the quiet persistence of faith, ceremony, and devotion. The city was alive not only through labor and hierarchy, but through belief, woven deeply into the soil. You step carefully along a flattened path, noticing subtle depressions and raised ridges in the earth. Cahokia wasn't just built on mounds and plazas, it was carefully sculpted to manage water, drainage, and the capricious moods of the Mississippi floodplain. This city didn't simply exist. It was actively molded, shaped, and defended against the forces of nature. And you, walking centuries later, can feel the silent ingenuity beneath your feet. The first clue is the network of ditches and embankments. Shallow channels, some running hundreds of meters, controlled the flow of water during seasonal floods. You crouch, brushing away loose soil, imagining the labor involved. Digging, leveling, reinforcing with packed earth. Rain, runoff, and river surges were anticipated, redirected, or contained. Survival in Cahokia depended as much on understanding the land as on feeding, trading, or performing rituals. Water management wasn't just functional, it shaped daily life. Fields needed irrigation, residential areas required drainage, and plazas had to remain accessible even during wet seasons. You imagine farmers hauling baskets of corn across muddy paths, children playing near carefully maintained channels, and residents adjusting to seasonal rhythms dictated by water levels. Life was dictated by both social order and environmental control, a delicate balance the city meticulously maintained. The city's mounds themselves contributed to this system. Elevated platforms kept residences, plazas, and ceremonial spaces safe from flooding. Monk's Mound, beyond symbolizing authority, doubled as a flood refuge. You step along its terraces, imagining families and livestock temporarily relocated to higher ground during heavy rains. The mound was a literal and symbolic anchor, protecting both life and hierarchy. Ponds, reservoirs, and controlled wetlands likely existed as well, storing water for dry seasons and supplementing agriculture. You crouch near a shallow depression, imagining it once holding water or aquatic plants, providing a buffer against drought. The city's inhabitants understood that survival wasn't just labor, it was anticipation, adaptation, and engineering on a human scale. Even small adjustments mattered. Channeling water to a field, redirecting runoff from a plaza, or reinforcing a slope against erosion. Floodplain adaptation also dictated settlement patterns. Residential mounds clustered on higher ground, ceremonial and elite structures on elevated terraces, and fields sprawled across more vulnerable areas. You walk between mounds, noting how geography and engineering intersect. The city is a blueprint of foresight, a deliberate negotiation between human ambition and environmental reality. Nature wasn't ignored, it was respected, managed, and incorporated into every aspect of urban life. Trade and ritual also depended on water. Rivers carried goods, travelers, and ideas into Cahokia, linking it to distant regions. Seasonal floods may have disrupted daily life, but they also enabled exchange, travel, and resource movement. You pick up a small shell fragment, imagining its journey along waterways, tracing the city's connectivity through both human and environmental channels. Water shaped not only survival but influence. Even mundane daily practices reflect adaptation. Hearths, storage pits, and homes were designed with drainage in mind. Streets and paths were slightly elevated to remain passable. Ditches directed rainwater away from living areas. You crouch near a faintly sunken path, imagining the careful observation required to prevent water from disrupting life. Ordinary existence, monumental architecture, and ritual activity were all interwoven with environmental intelligence. Congrats, you've glimpsed Cahokia's mastery of water and landscape. Ditches, mounds, terraces, and ponds reveal a civilization attuned to its environment, shaping and adapting to the capricious Mississippi floodplain. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, and realize that the city's survival, influence, and ritual life were all contingent on understanding and controlling water, an invisible network as vital as roads, trade, or social. You walk across the flattened mounds, once bustling with life, and notice a strange emptiness. Time has a peculiar way of erasing everything but traces. Cahokia, which once thrummed with the energy of thousands, rituals, trade, labor, and laughter, fell silent. You feel the weight of absence, the residue of ambition and hierarchy, and wonder how such a monumental city, carefully built and meticulously organized, could unravel. The signs of strain are subtle but persistent. Archaeologists find evidence of overworked fields, declining soil fertility, and stressed waterways. You crouch near a patch of compacted earth, imagining generations of farmers pushing the land to its limits. Crop yields fluctuate, food scarcity rises, and the ordinary labor that sustained life becomes fragile. Survival, once a steady rhythm, now teeters on uncertainty. The city's heartbeat slows. Social tensions likely played a role. Elite demands, labor obligations, and ritual expectations weighed heavily on the population. You can picture families growing frustrated, children learning obedience through exhaustion, and communities straining under the weight of hierarchy. Even the impressive mounds and ceremonial displays could not shield society from internal pressures. When the system becomes too rigid, it becomes brittle. Cahokia may have been too big, too complex, and too dependent on social conformity to withstand persistent stress. Environmental changes add another layer. Floods, droughts, and shifts in river patterns would have challenged both agriculture and infrastructure. You step carefully across the terrain, imagining swollen rivers cutting fields, ponds drying during summers, and storage pits failing to preserve enough corn. The delicate balance between human ambition and nature begins to falter. Even the meticulously engineered ditches, terraces, and elevated mounds could not protect the city indefinitely. Trade networks, once lifelines, may have faltered as well. You pick up a small shell fragment, imagining the distant rivers it traveled. If those connections weaken, if exotic goods and resources fail to arrive, the city's social fabric and hierarchy fray. Influence diminishes when the flow of material and prestige falters, and Cahokia's carefully maintained structure begins to unravel quietly, one transaction at a time. Population dynamics likely contributed. Rapid growth, concentrated in a relatively small area, strains resources and infrastructure. You picture crowded mounds, overused paths, and laborers pushed to exhaustion. Disease, conflict, or simple fatigue may have reduced the population, weakening social cohesion. The bustling plazas and thriving workshops you imagined centuries ago slowly emptied, leaving only echoes in the dirt. Abandonment appears gradual rather than sudden. Mounds remain, plazas lie open, fields return to wilderness, and the city's meticulous organization dissolves. You crouch among broken shards and scattered tools, imagining the last residents leaving behind hearths, storage pits, and personal possessions. Life continued elsewhere, but the center, the heart of Cahokia, was silenced. Monument and ordinary life alike were abandoned, leaving only memory and soil. Yet, even in decline, the city leaves lessons. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, feeling the persistence of labor, hierarchy, ritual, and adaptation. Cahokia fell, yes, but not for lack of ingenuity or effort. It collapsed because complex systems are fragile, even when carefully planned. Nature, human ambition, and social tension converge unpredictably, and even the greatest city can fade quietly into history. Congrats, you've walked among the traces of decline. The mounds, plazas, and fields speak of persistence, ingenuity, and vulnerability. Cahokia's silence is a reminder that even monumental achievements are temporary, that labor and ritual cannot always stave off entropy, and that history, patient and relentless, absorbs every. You walk across the abandoned mounds, feeling the quiet persistence of what was once a city alive with ritual, trade, and labor. Cahokia is silent now, but its influence did not vanish completely. The knowledge, social structures, and cultural practices developed here reverberated across North America, leaving subtle imprints on societies that followed. You feel as though the city is speaking softly, teaching lessons for those willing to observe. One of the clearest echoes is in mound building itself. Tribes and communities across the Mississippi Valley and beyond continued to erect earthen structures, drawing from techniques, symbolism, and planning perfected at Cahokia. You imagine future generations observing these mounds, learning from their scale, alignment, and purpose. The physical form of the city endures, even as the original inhabitants disappear. Monumental earthworks become a language, and Cahokia was its first great author. Social organization also carries forward. The hierarchical systems, ceremonial leadership, and distribution of prestige developed in Cahokia influenced how later societies structured themselves. You step across a small mound, imagining how leaders observed, controlled, and guided their communities. Hierarchy, ritual, and obligation. These concepts became woven into subsequent cultural practices, echoed in societies both near and far. Power, carefully choreographed, became a model. Trade networks and regional connectivity are another legacy. Cahokia demonstrated the value of linking distant communities through exchange of goods, ideas, and ritual practices. You pick up a fragment of pottery, imagining it moving from hand to hand, river to river. Later societies expanded, altered, and refined these networks, but the principle is the same. Influence travels along material and cultural threads. Cahokia's footprint extends far beyond its immediate geography. Ritual practices, cosmology, and ceremonial life also persisted. You can imagine woodhenges, plazas, and mounds inspiring spiritual observances elsewhere. Alignment with celestial events, structured feasts, and ritualized labor became patterns observed and adapted by communities in the centuries that followed. The city's spiritual architecture left both tangible and intangible markers in human memory, guiding belief and practice long after abandonment. Even artistic expression carries echoes. Pottery designs, carved figurines, and symbolic ornamentation found in later Mississippian sites suggest that the creativity nurtured in Cahokia continued to inspire artisans. You crouch, brushing dirt from a small carved figure, feeling the continuity of imagination, skill, and ritual across time. Craft becomes both culture and memory, preserving lessons of identity, hierarchy, and spiritual intent. Cahokia's influence is also evident in the sheer ambition it inspired. You can sense future generations striving to replicate monumental achievements, to organize large populations, and to integrate social, environmental, and spiritual life into cohesive communities. The city becomes a silent teacher, demonstrating both potential and limits, cautioning and inspiring simultaneously. The landscape itself remembers. Even centuries later, the Mississippi floodplain retains echoes of terraces, mounds, and water management systems. Fields, channels, and elevated plazas reveal a sophisticated understanding of environment, labor, and survival that informed practices long after Cahokia's decline. You step carefully, tracing the contours, and realize that the city's knowledge flows quietly through geography, like a river of memory. Congrats, you felt the enduring presence of Cahokia. Its influence stretches across time, shaping social structures, trade networks, ritual practices, artistry, and environmental adaptation. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that this city, long silent, continues to speak through monuments, artifacts, and landscapes. Cahokia. You step into a plaza, the wind whispering across the flattened earth, and imagine it filled with the clamor of thousands. Cahokia was not just a city of mounds and workshops, it was a city of feasts. Ritual gatherings, communal meals, and ceremonial consumption of food bound people together, reinforced hierarchy, and connected the living with the spiritual world. You crouch near a scatter of pottery fragments, imagining their contents: roasted corn, beans, squash, and perhaps meat from deer or fish. Feasts were more than nourishment, they were a performance. Leaders orchestrated events, determining who ate, who served, and who watched. You picture elevated platforms, drums beating, smoke curling into the sky, while families, laborers, and visitors arrange themselves according to social rules etched into every interaction. Hierarchy was visible in every bite, every portion, every seating arrangement. Even food reinforced obedience. Preparation for these gatherings required immense coordination. Fields had to yield enough crops, hunters and fishers had to supplement the harvest, and artisans produced utensils, bowls, and serving vessels. You imagine hundreds of hands at work, grinding corn, roasting meat, arranging offerings, and ensuring that the feast reflected both abundance and order. Survival and ritual intertwined. One could not exist without the other. Food itself carried symbolic meaning. Certain ingredients were reserved for ritual, certain dishes prepared for ceremonial purposes, and even the timing of consumption aligned with festivals, astronomical events, or religious observances. You pick up a small, burned pottery shard, imagining it once held a portion set aside for the dead, the spirits, or the elite. Every mouthful reinforced connection to family, to hierarchy, and to the unseen forces governing daily life. Participation in feasts was a form of social training. Children learned roles, laborers observed rules, and ordinary residents internalized hierarchy. You step lightly across the plaza, picturing families balancing sustenance with obligation, laughter with ceremony, and personal enjoyment with communal expectation. Feasts were at once joyful and controlled, celebratory and instructive. Trade and surplus shaped these gatherings. Exotic items, shells, copper, or rare stones, sometimes accompanied food, further demonstrating wealth, power, and reach. You can almost see the subtle exchanges, a gift of shells to secure favor, a copper ornament offered during the feast, and the ever-present acknowledgement of who controlled resources. Ritual feasting was performance, diplomacy, and hierarchy all rolled into one. Even waste mattered. You notice faint depressions, discarded shells, and charred remains, imagining the aftermath of a gathering. Cleanup was necessary, but the remnants also tell stories of scale, participation, and abundance. Archaeologists can reconstruct both daily life and ceremonial magnitude from what was left behind. You brush a fragment of pottery, sensing the hands, voices, and movement that once animated the space. Feasts were also spiritual. Portions were likely offered to deities, ancestors, or spirits of the land. You crouch and imagine smoke rising from food cooked for ritual purposes, the smell of roasted offerings mingling with the city's earthiness. Survival, hierarchy, and devotion merged seamlessly in these moments, creating a rhythm of life that tied the living to the land, the spirits, and each other. Congrats, you've glimpsed the pulse of Cahokia's communal life. Feasts, ceremonial meals, and ritual gatherings bound people together, reinforced social structures, and linked the human and spiritual worlds. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that even centuries later, the smell of roasted corn, the rhythm of drums, and the echo of laughter persist in the soil. Cahokia's, you wander through the quiet plazas, imagining them once alive with the hum of exchange. Cahokia was more than mounds and rituals. It was a hub of commerce, linking communities across hundreds of miles. Goods, ideas, and influence flowed through the city, binding it to distant regions and embedding it in the larger cultural landscape. You feel the invisible threads stretching outward, connecting this place to a world you can only partially imagine. Exotic materials hint at the reach of Cahokia's trade. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, these items appear in elite burials, ceremonial mounds, and even modest dwellings. You pick up a fragment of shell, imagining the rivers, forests, and human hands that carried it to this city. Trade was not just economic, it was social, political, and ritualistic. Ownership of rare goods signaled power, status, and participation in a complex web of relationships. Markets likely formed around plazas, drawing people from nearby villages and distant communities. You can picture families arriving with baskets of corn, beans, or woven mats, exchanging them for exotic items or prestige objects. The air would have been thick with voices, movement, and negotiation, a living network of commerce and communication. Each transaction, subtle or grand, reinforced both survival and hierarchy. Trade also reinforced ritual and ceremonial life. Exotic shells or copper artifacts often accompanied offerings, burials, or feasts, embedding distant resources into local spiritual practice. You crouch, brushing soil from a small copper fragment, imagining its careful placement in a mound or offering. Material culture, economy, and religion converged seamlessly in the city's social fabric. Beyond goods, ideas flowed through these networks. Ceremonial practices, architectural techniques, and artistic motifs traveled alongside trade items. You imagine a distant community observing Cahokia's mounds, adopting elements for their own society. Knowledge moved like the rivers themselves, fluid, persistent, and transformative. The city's influence extended far beyond its physical boundaries. The Mississippi River and its tributaries were highways of connection. Canoes, rafts, and portage routes carried goods and people efficiently, allowing Cahokia to maintain both local control and regional authority. You step along a faint path near the river, picturing traders arriving, goods in tow, messages and influence traveling upstream and downstream. Connectivity was as much a strategic advantage as monumental architecture or ritual authority. Trade also tied into political structure. Control of resources, the flow of prestige goods, and the timing of exchanges reinforced social hierarchy. You imagine a chief or priest coordinating distribution, ensuring that commoners received what they needed to survive while elites maintained visibility and status. Survival, obedience, and influence were intertwined through commerce. Even ordinary households participated. Small exotic items appear in domestic contexts, indicating that trade trickled down, shaping daily life subtly. You pick up a tiny shell bead, imagining its journey from distant waters into a family's possession. Trade wasn't just elite, it permeated life, linking survival, ritual, and identity. Congrats, you've traced Cahokia's threads of influence. Trade networks, exotic goods, and the flow of ideas reveal a city at the center of a vast, interconnected landscape. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that the city's power was as much in its relationships, commerce, and regional reach as in its mounds, plazas, or rituals. Cahokia's legacy flowed outward, persistent and far-reaching, long after the city itself fell silent. You wander through the quiet plazas, imagining them once alive with the hum of exchange. Cahokia was more than mounds and rituals. It was a hub of commerce, linking communities across hundreds of miles. Goods, ideas, and influence flowed through the city, binding it to distant regions and embedding it in the larger cultural landscape. You feel the invisible threads stretching outward, connecting this place to a world you can only partially imagine. Exotic materials hint at the reach of Cahokia's trade. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians. These items appear in elite burials, ceremonial mounds, and even modest dwellings. You pick up a fragment of shell, imagining the rivers, forests, and human hands that carried it to this city. Trade was not just economic, it was social, political, and ritualistic. Ownership of rare goods signaled power, status, and participation in a complex web of relationships. Markets likely formed around plazas, drawing people from nearby villages and distant communities. You can picture families arriving with baskets of corn, beans, or woven mats, exchanging them for exotic items or prestige objects. The air would have been thick with voices, movement, and negotiation, a living network of commerce and communication. Each transaction, subtle or grand, reinforced both survival and hierarchy. Trade also reinforced ritual and ceremonial life. Exotic shells or copper artifacts often accompanied offerings, burials, or feasts, embedding distant resources into local spiritual practice. You crouch, brushing soil from a small copper fragment, imagining its careful placement in a mound or offering. Material culture, economy, and religion converged seamlessly in the city's social fabric. Beyond goods, ideas flowed through these networks. Ceremonial practices, architectural techniques, and artistic motifs traveled alongside trade items. You imagine a distant community observing Cahokia's mounds, adopting elements for their own society. Knowledge moved like the rivers themselves, fluid, persistent, and transformative. The city's influence extended far beyond its physical boundaries. The Mississippi River and its tributaries were highways of connection. Canoes, rafts, and portage routes carried goods and people efficiently, allowing Cahokia to maintain both local control and regional authority. You step along a faint path near the river, picturing traders arriving, goods in tow, messages and influence traveling upstream and downstream. Connectivity was as much a strategic advantage as monumental architecture or ritual authority. Trade also tied into political structure. Control of resources, the flow of prestige goods, and the timing of exchanges reinforced social hierarchy. You imagine a chief or priest coordinating distribution, ensuring that commoners received what they needed to survive while elites maintained visibility and status. Survival, obedience, and influence were intertwined through commerce. Even ordinary households participated. Small exotic items appear in domestic contexts, indicating that trade trickled down, shaping daily life subtly. You pick up a tiny shell bead, imagining its journey from distant waters into a family's possession. Trade wasn't just elite, it permeated life, linking survival, ritual, and identity. Congrats, you've traced Cahokia's threads of influence. Trade networks, exotic goods, and the flow of ideas reveal a city at the center of a vast, interconnected landscape. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that the city's power was as much in its relationships, commerce, and regional reach as in its mounds, plazas, or rituals. Cahokia's legacy flowed outward, persistent and far-reaching, long after the city itself fell silent. You walk across the city, feeling the quiet order embedded in the mounds, plazas, and streets. Cahokia was not a random collection of structures. It was a meticulously organized society, with authority, ritual, and labor entwined in every aspect of life. Power here was visible, tangible, and reinforced daily, whether in monumental architecture or subtle social expectation. You can almost sense the rhythm of hierarchy guiding every movement. At the top were the elites, leaders, priests, and ritual specialists who controlled ceremonial, economic, and spiritual life. You imagine a figure standing atop Monk's Mound, observing the city like a conductor of a vast, human orchestra. Authority was performed as much as exercised. Elevated platforms, rituals, and access to rare goods reinforced status, creating a society structured around visibility and control. Ordinary residents understood their place intuitively, guided by both ceremony and obligation. Beneath the elite were artisans, laborers, and specialized workers. These individuals maintained mounds, prepared food, produced tools, and facilitated trade. You crouch near a pottery shard or a broken tool, imagining the countless hours spent shaping material culture, tending crops, and supporting rituals. Their labor was essential, yet their authority was limited. Obedience was both practical and enforced, a quiet force binding the city together. Families and kinship networks played a crucial role. Lineage determined access to resources, participation in ritual, and social status. You step along a path linking residential mounds, picturing families coordinating labor, managing household affairs, and observing social norms. Authority was inherited and reinforced through daily practice, subtle guidance, and communal expectations. Social cohesion depended on both blood and behavior. Ritual reinforced hierarchy. Ceremonies, feasts, and offerings were staged carefully, ensuring that power remained visible and unquestioned. You imagine drums beating across plazas, smoke rising from prepared offerings, and leaders directing movement and attention. Every gesture, every portion of food, and every object placement reminded participants of their role in the larger social order. Authority was woven into experience. Trade and access to resources also enforced hierarchy. Elites controlled the flow of exotic goods, food surplus, and ritual items, ensuring their visibility and dependence. You pick up a small copper fragment or shell, imagining its careful allocation by city administrators. Control over material and symbolic wealth reinforced social stratification, binding survival and obedience to status. Even ordinary residents had agency, though limited. You imagine families negotiating daily life, participating in communal tasks, and subtly influencing local networks. Cooperation, compliance, and contribution were expected. Deviation could undermine survival or provoke social consequences. Authority was both omnipresent and internalized. The city's layout reinforced these dynamics. Elevated mounds, plazas, and ceremonial spaces dictated movement, observation, and interaction. You walk along a path, noticing how residential clusters relate to monumental mounds. Authority was spatialized. Social hierarchy became visible in the city's very design. Ordinary labor, ritual, and movement all acknowledged and reinforced power. Congrats, You've glimpsed the intricate web of social hierarchy and political organization in Cahokia. Leadership, labor, ritual, and kinship intersected to create a society both structured and resilient, yet always dependent on cooperation and obedience. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that the city's order was as much cultural and psychological as it was architectural. You step softly among the mounds, feeling the silent weight of lives long past. Beneath your feet, soil preserves stories of death, status, and belief. Cahokia's burials were not random, they were deliberate, ritualized, and socially significant. The city was alive with hierarchy in life, and that hierarchy extended even into death, leaving traces that speak centuries later. High-status burials appear atop or within ceremonial mounds. You crouch near a faint depression, imagining a body carefully placed, accompanied by copper ornaments, shell beads, and pottery. These objects were not mere possessions. They were symbols, indicators of power, achievement, and spiritual significance. Death became a continuation of hierarchy, a performance of status even when the individual no longer walked the earth. The placement of burials was symbolic. Elevated mounds connected the deceased with the heavens, aligning them with celestial events or cosmological ideas. You imagine a priest overseeing the interment, ensuring that both ceremony and spatial significance were maintained. Burial was a ritual act that reinforced social structure, cosmology, and memory simultaneously. Grave goods reveal connections between the living and the dead. You pick up a small, worn bead or pottery shard, imagining it placed deliberately to accompany the deceased. Items likely served practical, symbolic, and ritualistic purposes, marking social identity, facilitating spiritual journeys, or reinforcing community cohesion. Death was not an endpoint. It was a continuation of social and spiritual order. Commoners, too, were buried with care, though less lavishly. You walk across a residential mound, noting smaller pits and modest artifacts. Even in simplicity, these burials demonstrate attention, ritual, and recognition of individual life. Ordinary people participated in spiritual continuity, connecting family, labor, and daily life to the forces that governed existence. The act of burial involved the community. You can imagine neighbors and relatives performing ceremonies, observing mourning, and offering small gifts. Ritualized labor, digging, preparing goods, and performing rites, bound the living together while honoring the dead. Every burial reinforced cultural knowledge, hierarchy, and participation in a shared belief system. Some burials suggest sacrificial or symbolic elements. Certain individuals, sometimes children or high-status figures, were interred with offerings designed to accompany them into the spiritual world. You crouch near a faintly sunken area, imagining solemn chants, slow movement, and the weight of both grief and duty. Mortuary practice was a convergence of emotion, authority, and ritual performance. Spatial organization also reflected social and ritual logic. High-status burials were visible, elevated, and integrated with ceremonial spaces, while ordinary graves clustered nearby, connecting daily life with ritual landscapes. You step along faint depressions, sensing the deliberate choreography of movement, visibility, and social significance. Burial was architecture as much as it was ceremony. Even centuries later, these practices leave echoes. Soil preserves bone, artifact, and position, offering archaeologists glimpses into identity, hierarchy, and belief. You pick up a fragment of pottery, brushing away dust, and feel the quiet dialogue between past and present. The dead continue to teach, silently, persistently, through the traces left behind. Congrats, you've glimpsed Cahokia's mortuary world. Burial practices and ritualized interment reveal hierarchy, spiritual belief, and communal cohesion, extending the city's social and symbolic order into death. You straighten, brushing. You step into a residential mound, the sun warm on the flattened earth, and imagine the subtle rhythm of daily life. Cahokia was not only mounds, plazas, and ritual, it was people, families, labor, and the ordinary, often repetitive acts that sustained the city. Survival and society depended on these routines, quiet and persistent, linking generations through work, skill, and habit. You wake to the smell of smoke from small hearths, the low murmur of neighbors stirring, and the distant rhythm of drums or chants from ceremonial mounds. Children run between huts, imitating adults, learning the unspoken rules of society. There is work to do. Corn must be ground, tools repaired, and homes maintained. Ordinary life, far from ceremonial spectacle, is painstaking, repetitive, and essential. Meals are simple yet labor-intensive. Corn, beans, and squash are ground, roasted, and combined in humble pots. You crouch near a hearth, imagining someone tending the fire, turning a small pot of stew, ensuring that the family is fed. Meat, fish, or gathered plants supplement the diet, but preparation is deliberate. Survival is a constant, rhythmic act, punctuated by feasts, trade, and occasional ritual. Children and family play vital roles. They carry small tasks, assist with food preparation, and learn practical and social skills. You watch them in your mind's eye, balancing chores with games, learning responsibility, hierarchy, and cooperation through subtle observation. Ordinary life is education, survival, and socialization all at once. Craft and labor structure the day. Artisans shape pottery, carve tools, and weave mats. Hunters and fishers maintain their skills. Farmers tend fields, monitor water, and transport produce to storage or plazas. You pick up a fragment of pottery, imagining the careful hands shaping it for daily use or ritual. Every act, whether crafting, planting, or cooking, is a thread in the city's intricate fabric. Communication and observation are constant. People exchange news, gossip, and instruction as they move between mounds, fields, and plazas. You step along a worn path, sensing the flow of information, who arrived from trade routes, which crops are failing, and who will participate in upcoming rituals. Daily life is interwoven with vigilance, awareness, and subtle social negotiation. Hygiene and sanitation are basic. No running water, no indoor plumbing, and very limited cleaning options mean that survival includes accepting discomfort. You can almost smell the earth, the hearths, and the mix of human presence. No toilet, no soap, no sense of privacy. And yet, ordinary life persists, resilient, adaptive, and structured. Even leisure is purposeful. Singing, storytelling, games, and small personal rituals provide relief, instruction, and reinforcement of social norms. You imagine someone quietly whittling a small object, children playing nearby, or a family sharing stories at the hearth. These moments are small, fleeting, but vital for mental, social, and spiritual continuity. Congrats, you've walked among Cahokia's ordinary life. Daily routines, food, craft, labor, education, and observation sustain survival and reinforce social order. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that these quiet acts, repeated over generations, created the rhythm and resilience of a city capable of monumental achievement. Cahokia's heartbeat wasn't only in mounds or plazas, it was in the daily, patient persistence of its people. You step onto the flattened plaza, the wind carrying the faint echoes of past gatherings, and tilt your head toward the horizon. Cahokia was not only a city of earth, labor, and ritual, it was a city of the sky. Its inhabitants watched the sun, moon, and stars with precision, embedding cosmic knowledge into woodhenges, mounds, and ceremonial layouts. The heavens guided daily life, ritual, and social structure, silently but insistently. Woodhenges, circular arrangements of massive posts, mark the most tangible connection between Cahokia and the sky. You crouch at the site of a post hole, imagining a tall timber standing upright, perfectly aligned with the sunrise on a solstice morning. Observation was meticulous, measurement precise. Ritual and astronomy were inseparable, woven into both ceremonial display and practical life. Solar events were particularly important. Solstices and equinoxes determined planting, harvesting, and ritual timing. You picture priests or leaders observing the horizon, noting the sun's first rays striking specific posts or mounds. Ordinary residents, participating in daily labor and ceremony, were subtly guided by these alignments. The sky structured behavior, work, and devotion alike. The mounds themselves align with celestial events. Monk's mound, smaller pyramids, and plaza orientations demonstrate careful planning. You step along a faint ridge, imagining someone centuries ago observing lunar phases, mapping stars, and adjusting ritual schedules accordingly. Architecture becomes a celestial calendar, translating cosmic patterns into terrestrial order. Observation extended beyond practicality. Rituals were timed for spiritual significance. You crouch near a pottery fragment, imagining it decorated to reflect the sun, moon, or stars. Offerings, feasts, and ceremonies were synchronized with celestial cycles, reinforcing social hierarchy and belief systems. Life, labor, and devotion were inseparable from the heavens. Even subtle environmental changes mattered. Seasonal shifts, flooding, and soil cycles were interpreted in relation to the sky, guiding agriculture and planning. You imagine elders explaining to younger generations how celestial observation predicted survival challenges, merging astronomy with practical wisdom. Knowledge of the heavens was a form of power, a tool for guidance, prediction, and social cohesion. Trade and cultural influence extended the reach of this celestial understanding. Communities visiting Cahokia may have carried knowledge of solstice alignments, woodhenges, and ritual timing back to their own villages. You pick up a small carved stone, imagining it as a mnemonic for astronomical observation, a tool for both ritual and practical decision-making. Knowledge traveled as quietly as goods. Even ordinary residents experienced the sky's influence indirectly. Daily routines, ceremonies, and communal gatherings were shaped by observation, ensuring that survival and ritual adhered to patterns invisible but pervasive. You step lightly, imagining lives synchronized with sunrise, moonrise, and the movement of stars, a rhythm of life both subtle and persistent. Congrats, you've glimpsed Cahokia's celestial intelligence. Woodhenges, mounds, and ritual timing reveal a city in constant dialogue with the heavens. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that astronomy guided survival, hierarchy, and spiritual practice. Cahokia was not only shaped by earth and labor, it was aligned with the cosmos, a civilization reading the sky as carefully as it managed its mounds, fields, and people. You stand on a quiet mound, wind sweeping across the flattened plazas, and feel the weight of absence. Cahokia, despite centuries of study, still holds secrets, puzzles that archaeologists, historians, and curious minds struggle to piece together. For a city so monumental, so meticulously planned, so vividly alive in its time, much remains unseen, unknown, and mysterious. The earth keeps its secrets carefully. The population remains a question. Estimates suggest tens of thousands once lived here, but precise numbers elude certainty. You imagine crowded mounds, bustling plazas, and families navigating daily life. How many people could the city truly sustain? Did overcrowding contribute to stress, conflict, or decline? Every estimate is a shadow, a guess based on soil, artifacts, and the echoes of structures long abandoned. The reasons for Cahokia's rise and fall are equally enigmatic. Environmental changes, resource depletion, social tension, disease, likely all played a part, but their interplay remains obscure. You step across a faint path, imagining generations laboring, thriving, and then gradually leaving. Why did people abandon such a sophisticated city? Was it a slow unraveling or punctuated crisis? Silence, again, answers only partially. The spiritual and political hierarchy leaves questions too. Leaders, priests, and elites controlled ritual, labor, and trade, but the specifics of governance are unclear. You crouch near a small pottery shard, imagining debates, decisions, and rituals that structured society. How were disputes resolved? How were leadership transitions managed? Authority, though evident in monuments, remains opaque in practice. Many artifacts remain enigmatic. Figurines, carved stones, exotic goods. What exactly did they signify? You pick up a small shell fragment, imagining the symbolic weight it carried. Messages encoded in design, placement, or material may be lost forever. Did objects serve multiple purposes, ritual, social, educational, or were some intended for meanings now inaccessible to modern observers? Interpretation is tentative, a careful speculation based on fragments. Cahokia's trade networks provoke questions too. We know goods arrived from distant regions, but the mechanics of exchange remain partly mysterious. You imagine traders moving silently along rivers, negotiating with distant communities. Were goods exchanged freely, coerced, or ceremonially mandated? How did these networks influence politics, spirituality, or social cohesion? The answer is buried alongside the shells, copper, and pottery. Even the city's daily life has mysteries. Hearths, storage pits, workshops, and dwellings provide glimpses, but they cannot convey personal thoughts, dreams, or minor conflicts. You can picture families grinding corn, crafting tools, or teaching children, but the minutiae of experience remains lost. Ordinary life is reconstructed, piece by piece, yet gaps persist, reminding you that history is always partially invisible. Cahokia's spiritual knowledge and celestial observation remain partly obscured. Woodhenges, alignments, and mounds hint at astronomical sophistication, but the full scope of understanding is unknown. You imagine priests observing solstices, rituals timed to cosmic events, and knowledge passed orally. How precise were calculations? How were rituals explained to the general population? The answers linger just beyond reach. Congrats, you've glimpsed Cahokia's enduring mysteries. Population, hierarchy, spiritual practice, trade, daily life, all retain elements of uncertainty, puzzle pieces partially hidden in soil, artifact, and you stand on the highest mound, wind tracing the contours of the earth beneath your feet, and look across the silent city. Cahokia is gone, yet it persists, in soil, in artifact, in memory, and in the echoes of lives lived centuries ago. The city rose from a river floodplain, ambitious, ordered, and extraordinary, sustained by labor, ritual, and ingenuity. And now, it speaks only through traces, whispers, and imagination. Monk's Mound dominates the landscape, a testament to human ambition and hierarchical organization. You imagine leaders standing atop it, surveying laborers, ritual participants, and the city's rhythms below. Daily life, craft, and ceremony unfolded under careful watch, creating a society both monumental and intimate. The city was alive with purpose, structure, and persistence, yet it was also fragile, dependent on labor, cooperation, and environmental balance. Every mound, plaza, and workshop tells a story of human ingenuity. You crouch near pottery shards, stone tools, and carved figurines, imagining the hands that shaped them, the minds that imbued them with meaning, and the labor invested in both survival and ritual. Cahokia thrived through knowledge of soil, water, cosmos, and society. Survival was deliberate, careful, and endlessly repetitive, yet infused with creativity and spirituality. Trade networks extended influence far beyond the city. Exotic shells, copper, and mica trace routes through rivers and forests, connecting Cahokia to distant communities. Ideas, rituals, and artistic motifs traveled along these networks, reinforcing the city's cultural and political authority. You pick up a fragment of shell, imagining the journey and the hands that carried it, feeling the subtle weight of interconnection across hundreds of miles. Feasts, ceremonies, and communal gatherings reveal the heartbeat of social cohesion. Ordinary people, artisans, and elites all participated in structured rituals that reinforced hierarchy, spiritual practice, and survival. You picture smoke curling from hearths, drums marking rhythm, and ritual gestures performed with precision. Cahokia's society thrived on shared experience, blending joy, duty, and belief in ways that remain perceptible even centuries later. Yet, as with all human endeavors, fragility lurked beneath grandeur. Environmental stress, social tension, and resource strain contributed to decline. You walk across the plazas, imagining families, leaders, and laborers navigating scarcity, conflict, and uncertainty. The city slowly emptied, leaving mounds, artifacts, and subtle traces behind. Silence fell, yet even absence carries meaning. Cahokia's legacy endures. Later societies drew inspiration from its mounds, ritual practices, trade networks, and social structures. Celestial observation, earthworks, and craft continued to influence North America long after the city was abandoned. You straighten, brushing dust from your hands, aware that greatness is not measured solely by survival, but by the enduring echo of ideas, labor, and imagination. Even unanswered questions, the population, precise rituals, social nuances, and daily thoughts add to the city's presence. Mystery preserves attention, demanding curiosity and reflection. You step lightly among the mounds, feeling the persistent dialogue between past and present. Cahokia teaches patience, ingenuity, resilience, and humility, reminding observers that history is both revealed and concealed, tangible and ephemeral. Congrats, you've witnessed the full sweep of Cahokia's story. From monumental ambition and daily labor, through ritual, trade, and cosmic observation, to decline, mystery, and lasting influence, the city speaks through every mound, artifact, and shadow of human effort. You lift your gaze to the horizon, wind brushing your face, and realize that even in silence, Cahokia continues to teach, quietly, patiently, and profoundly, a lost city echoing through time.